It began on a Monday evening after I'd stayed late at work. The office was empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights, and the streets outside were nearly deserted. I walked to my car through the parking lot, carrying my bag and thinking about dinner when I first heard them. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, following me in rhythm. At first, I thought it was someone leaving the building behind me. I turned sharply, expecting to see a janitor or another late worker, but the lot was empty. I laughed nervously, telling myself my mind was playing tricks. But the footsteps continued. They were faint but distinct, echoing against the asphalt in a pattern I could not ignore. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself it was someone on the other side of the lot, but the sound accelerated in perfect sync with me. Then, when I stopped abruptly to tie my shoe, the footsteps halted as well. I froze, heart pounding, certain it was coincidence. Then I took another step and the footsteps resumed. The sensation of being followed made the hair on my neck prickle. I tried calling a friend, but my phone had no signal. I started walking faster, then jogging, then nearly running, and every time I paused to catch my breath, the footsteps stopped immediately. It was impossible. No person could match my exact movements, stop, and start with me. By the time I reached my car, the footsteps ceased entirely, leaving only the silence of the empty lot and my shallow breathing. I locked the doors, got in, and drove home. I told myself it was exhaustion, maybe anxiety after a long week. But that night, I lay in bed listening to the familiar creaks of my apartment and the city sounds outside, and I realized I was imagining nothing. There was a rhythm in my apartment, a phantom cadence of steps that matched my own movements. I closed my eyes, trying to convince myself it was over. It wasn't. The next day, the footsteps returned, this time following me in the office corridors. Every time I stopped to make a call or check an email, they stopped too. The rhythm was patient, waiting for me to move, echoing as if mirrored from a distance. No one else seemed to notice. When I asked coworkers if they heard anything, they looked at me like I had lost my mind, and I wondered if maybe I had. The feeling of being watched, measured, mirrored had started to settle into my mind in a way that made reality feel fragile. By the evening, I could not shake the sensation. Every step I took outside, every turn, every pause, the footsteps were there, and I began noticing other signs. Shadows in corners that disappeared when I looked directly at them. A faint, cold draft on the back of my neck, even in closed spaces, doors that I had locked still slightly ajar when I returned. And always the footsteps. Sleep became impossible. The next night, I tried staying awake, pacing my apartment deliberately, stopping and starting to test the pattern. The footsteps mirrored me perfectly, a sound both distant and impossible, like the echo of my own movements from some other dimension. I could feel them pressing against the floor, against the walls, waiting for me to move. I realized I could no longer trust the silence. It was never truly silent. I tried documenting it, recording audio, video, anything that might capture what was happening. But the devices picked up nothing unusual. The footsteps existed only in the perception of my senses. And that realization terrified me more. If no one else could hear it, then I was alone with it. Alone with a presence that adapted to me, anticipated me, and could stop and start in exact coordination. I went outside during the day to test it. Even in crowded streets, with people passing by, the rhythm persisted, though fainter, hidden beneath other noises. I would stop to look around, and the sound stopped. Then it would resume as soon as I moved. On the subway, in cafes, even in the office, it followed, invisible, inhuman. I began to avoid going out alone, but even with company, the steps continued. My friends could not hear them. They said I was tense, paranoid. But how could I explain a sound that only existed when I was moving? The psychological pressure began to manifest physically. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and I had trouble breathing. I found myself hesitating before every movement, terrified to step forward, terrified to stop, afraid that either action would trigger something I could not see. The footsteps were patient. They did not hurry. They did not retreat. They waited, always waiting. One evening, I sat in my car parked on a quiet street, lights off, and listened. The footsteps approached, then stopped as I held my breath. I began counting silently, trying to rationalize, try to convince myself it was my own subconscious imagining the cadence. Then a voice whispered my name, a breathy hiss that seemed to come from the back seat. I leapt, checked every angle, and found nothing. Only the rhythmic pressure of steps on asphalt, stopping when I did, resuming when I moved. It was now relentless. I could no longer leave the apartment without hearing it. I began mapping my own movements, noticing patterns. The footsteps were patient, predictable, yet impossible to evade. I realized I could not outrun them. I could not hide, and I began to suspect that they were learning me, shaping themselves around my habits, waiting for something I could not understand. The presence became more aggressive. It was not just the footsteps anymore. Doors that I was certain I had locked open by themselves. Objects shifted subtly, leaving me disoriented. At night, the temperature would drop suddenly, breath visible in rooms that should have been warm. Mirrors reflected movements that were not mine. Sometimes I would see shapes in the periphery of my vision, human-like but elongated, impossibly thin, dissolving when I turned to face them. One evening, I took a long walk to exhaust myself, hoping the physical effort would tire me enough to sleep. The streets were quiet, empty, the city asleep. And there they were, the footsteps. They were behind me, perfectly synchronized, but this time they were faster, slightly lighter, almost playful in the cadence. I dared not look back. I forced myself to focus on the sidewalk ahead, my heart hammering. I stopped. The steps stopped. I moved. They moved. I tried running. That did not help. They followed every step, every turn, every stumble. I ducked into alleyways, tried hiding behind parked cars, tried slipping into stores. Always the rhythm caught up. Always the silence of their waiting consumed me. I began to feel the weight of their gaze, though no eyes could be seen. The air itself seemed heavier, denser, like it was being pressed down by something unseen. At home, I started locking windows, barricading doors, but the sound of footsteps would sometimes start inside the apartment. I knew it was impossible, yet I heard them pacing, circling, halting exactly when I froze. I felt as if I had brought it with me, that it was no longer external, but embedded in the space around me. I could not escape. I stopped answering calls, stopped talking to friends. I began keeping a journal, noting the times, locations, and reactions. The pattern was consistent. The entity mirrored movement, always stopped when I stopped, always resumed when I moved. But there was another factor emerging. The pauses were becoming longer, more deliberate. The stops were lingering, and in those moments, the air felt thicker, the pressure more intense. It felt almost like a threat, a testing of boundaries. Sleep became a battlefield. I would lie in bed, counting the seconds, willing my muscles to remain still. The footsteps were patient, but now I could feel them in my bones. Sometimes I could sense them leaning closer, as though trying to merge with my shadow. Fear had invaded every aspect of life. I could not eat. I could not focus. I existed only in movement and pause, defined entirely by the rhythm that haunted me. The presence escalated. One night, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps in my bedroom. My apartment was otherwise silent. I froze, heart pounding, unable to breathe. The steps circled the bed, measured, slow, precise. Then they stopped. Silence. I held my breath, counting each second as if survival depended on it. A whisper of movement brushed my arm, cold and slick like wet cloth. I bolted upright, light on, only to find the bed empty. The air reeked of something metallic, something alive. I began seeing it everywhere. Shadows that lingered unnaturally long, shapes that twisted just outside the corner of my vision. It was no longer just steps. The world itself seemed attuned to its rhythm. I could not move without feeling it, could not stand still without fearing what would happen if I stayed too long. It followed me in mirrors, in photographs, in reflections on windows and screens. I attempted to leave the city, hoping to distance myself. I drove for hours, hotel to hotel, always moving. And always I could hear it, not just outside, but inside the room. Always following, never hurrying, never leaving. I realized that it could cross space with me. I tried distraction, music, noise, but the footsteps persisted, threading themselves into my environment, part of the world now. Sleep deprivation made me hallucinate. I would see figures standing silently in doorways, hear whispers repeating my name, smell decay in otherwise clean rooms. I began talking to it, reasoning, pleading. It did not respond. It did not need to. Its purpose seemed to be observation, anticipation, a test of endurance. Then one night, I stopped moving completely. Hours passed. Nothing. I dare not breathe loudly. The air was tight around me, almost tangible. Then I felt it against my skin, brushing, waiting, patient. I realized something horrifying. It was not just following me. It was studying me, understanding me. I had no idea what it wanted or what would happen if it stopped waiting. It became a cycle I could not break. I moved, it followed. I stopped, it stopped. Days, nights, weeks, blurring together. My body grew weak from lack of proper rest and food. My mind teetered on the edge of collapse, haunted by the invisible presence that mirrored me perfectly. I began seeing it in the dark corners of rooms, standing behind me in reflections, waiting for me to move. Its form was never clear, a shadow that bent space, an absence of light that felt solid, heavy, threatening. One evening, I locked myself in my apartment, bolted every door, taped every window. I lay on the floor in complete darkness, hoping stillness would keep it away. For hours, nothing. Then, I felt a vibration in the floorboards beneath me. Subtle at first, then insistent. Footsteps. They moved in perfect sync with my slightest motion. A twitch of my finger, a shift in my leg, a breath. I felt them matching me exactly. I could not hide from them, not even in stillness. Desperation drove me to extreme measures. I stopped moving for longer periods, hours, almost days. My body ached, muscles atrophied, but I could not risk triggering it. The footsteps grew quieter at times, almost contemplative, yet I could feel their intent pressing through the floor, the walls, the air itself. It was patient, inexhaustible. It had no reason to hurry. And then, slowly, I realized this entity was not just following me. It was tethered to me, part of me now, inseparable. Sleep came only in fragmented moments. Dreams were filled with the sound of its steps, always mimicking my own, always stopping and starting with perfect, terrifying precision. I could not escape its presence. I moved to another country, changed apartments, jobs, routines, but the footsteps persisted, patient and silent until I took a step. Now I live with it. Every action, every movement is measured. Every pause is a trap. I have learned to control my breathing, to hesitate before every step, because I cannot outrun it. It is everywhere I am. It is in the reflections, the shadows, the floorboards, the air around me. I do not know what it wants. I do not know if it can be stopped. Some nights when I lie in bed and hold my breath, I can hear it lingering outside the room, waiting for me to move. When I dare to breathe, the footsteps resume, patient, relentless, tethered to my rhythm, and I understand a terrifying truth. I will never walk alone again. The entity is not following me. It is me.